Good evening from New Delhi, and good morning or good afternoon if you're listening from other time zones. My name is Shivani, and I'm the Executive Director of Housing and Land Rights India. And it is my great joy to welcome all of you to this extremely special event today. We are here to celebrate 20 years of the founding of Housing and Land Rights Network India and 20 years of the United Nations Housing Rapporteur mandate. Today is really a dream come true for me because when we completed our 20 years last year, I really thought that the best way to celebrate this would be with all rapporteurs. It seemed like a really wild idea at that time, but this year also marks 20 years of the completion of the housing mandate of the special rapporteurs. And it seemed like the perfect time to put both events together and commemorate these historic events. And I'm deeply grateful to all the rapporteurs for the enthusiasm and support that has made this possible. And of course, to the technical miracle of virtual conferencing, which has brought us together from so many countries and time zones. So this is really a very special moment for me. I know everyone is waiting to hear the rapporteurs, but I do need to take a few minutes to speak about Housing and Land Rights Network India, which is the reason why we are all here today. So HLRN was founded in New Delhi to meet gaps in research and policy around the issues of housing and land rights, but also to promote housing and land rights as human rights in the region. It was founded by Mr. Milun Kothari, who is wearing two hats today, as he is also the first special rapporteur on adequate housing. After working with HLRN for 16 years, I can proudly say that I really believe that the mission with which the organization was created has been fulfilled. This has been possible not just by the work of our great team over the years, but by the relentless work and support that we have received from so many people who have traversed this path with us. Our supporters, partner organizations, local communities, donors, and also the UN Housing Rights Mandate, including each special rapporteur who has helped us greatly. We have also been blessed with exceptional board members over the years. And today I would really like to thank two people who have stood as pillars on our board and given us great support and guidance, Ms. Jayavati Srivastav and Mr. Paul Divakar. So thank you for your support. I'm also very grateful to my team at HLRN, without whom we would not be here today. So we have a great team of very dedicated and hardworking, committed people, and I express my gratitude to everyone. So it is this collective spirit and energy and support over the years that has brought us to where we are and made us who we are. So now I would like to just, thinking back of the journey of 20 years, if I'm asked of, what have been the three main achievements of HLRN, I would say that the first really has been that we have been instrumental in mainstreaming the human rights approach to housing in India, not just in our work with governments at various levels and various branches of the government, but also with civil society, national human rights institutions, and local communities, including persons living in homelessness and inadequate housing conditions. Second, I believe that we have been successful in creating avenues for affected communities to access human rights mechanisms that are available both at the national and international level. We have created a bridge for local communities to access the UN human rights system. We have helped communities access relevant mechanisms, taken their voices to the UN, and helped bring international law, guidelines, and standards to local communities, including through extensive human rights education, dissemination of material, and also translation of key standards and laws into local languages. Thirdly, I believe that HLRN has contributed consistently to the development of standards at the international level on housing and land rights. Whether it is general comments of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, or the UN eviction guidelines or the security of tenure guidelines, and most recently, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. So HLRN has played a role always in trying its best to contribute to standard setting at the global level. Our work over 20 years is difficult to capture, especially during the pandemic when we have so many restrictions. But we have put together a short slideshow to give you a visual glimpse into our world of work. So please watch this. So thank you for watching. That was a brief glimpse into our work. Very difficult to condense 20 years of work, but I hope you also saw yourselves there briefly, I think. So now we move to the next part of this historic event, which is really to celebrate the 20 years of the United Nations Housing Rapporteur mandate. And this is also historic because it's the first time that all UN Special Rapporteurs on Adequate Housing in the history of the mandate are sharing the same platform. And it is my deepest honor to be sharing this space with all of you. So from the bottom of my heart, a huge thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to be with us on this very special occasion. The year 2000 marked a pivotal moment in the history of human rights at the United Nations. It was the first time that the United Nations recognized the need for a special rapporteur for the right to adequate housing. And this really marked the recognition of the right to adequate housing as an inalienable, universal human right. So while we are celebrating 20 years of the creation of this mandate, I also want to say that we must celebrate the collective achievements of the special rapporteurs, as well as the outstanding individual contributions of each special rapporteur on adequate housing so far, because each one has left such an impressive legacy in terms of standards they have established, guidance to states, as well as recommendations for the international community. Today, as we find ourselves in the throes of this pandemic that has really highlighted more than ever before the importance of adequate housing as a key determinant of health and life, something that the United Nations rapporteurs have been reiterating for the last 20 years. Today, we find that this right really needs to urgently be upheld. And there is no one better in the entire world to deliberate about the current situation of the human right to adequate housing than the special rapporteurs who are present with us on the screen and in cyberspace today. I am deeply honored to present to you four exceptional, brilliant, passionate, and committed housing rights activists, and I will introduce them one by one. The first special rapporteur on adequate housing was Mr. Milun Kothari, who served his term from 2000 to 2008. Milun is an independent expert on human rights and social policy. He regularly conducts trainings for civil society, UN agencies, national human rights institutions, and governments. He is also involved in teaching and research work with academic institutions around the world. In 2013, he was the Dr. Martin Luther King Scholar at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Currently, he is president of UPR Info and is actively promoting the UN's Universal Periodic Review as an effective mechanism to ensure state accountability. The second special rapporteur was Raquel Rolnick, who served her term from 2008 to 2014. She is a professor at the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Sao Paulo. An architect and urban planner with 35 years of experience, Raquel has also served various government positions, including Director of the Planning Department of the City of Sao Paulo and National Secretary for Urban Programs of the Brazilian Ministry. She is author of several books and articles, including her most recent book, which is titled Urban Warfare, Housing in the Age of Finance. The third special rapporteur on housing was Leilani Farah, who served her term from 2014 to 2020. And Leilani's term actually just ended in April of this year. And she is now the global director of an organization called The Shift, which is really aims to be an international movement to secure the right to housing globally. She is the central character in a documentary titled Push that talks about the financialization of housing and is being screened around the world. So try and watch it if you haven't. She also co-hosts a podcast called Pushback Talks on the same topic. And our newest rapporteur is Mr. Balakrishnan Rajgopal, who assumed his role on the 1st of May 2020. He is a professor of law and development at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's also founder of the Displacement Research and Action Network at MIT. He has conducted over 20 years of research on social movements and human rights advocacy and has held visiting professorships and fellowships at institutions around the world. So as you can see, we have a very illustrious and qualified panel today. And I think everyone is waiting with bated breath to hear you. I think I have spoken enough. So we are going to have 3 rounds of questions with the special rapporteurs and then some time for discussion between them. So I will now present my first question, which will be answered by the special rapporteurs in the order of their mandates. So we will move chronologically with the first rapporteur. So here's my question. What do you believe to be the greatest contribution of the Housing Rapporteur mandate? And as special rapporteur, what has been your greatest takeaway? And perhaps if you could share a moving memory or a powerful memory of your term as rapporteur, something that has stayed with you, I think that will also be very interesting for our audience today. So over to you, Milun.
Okay, thanks very much, Shivani, and hello everyone around the world. I'm a little bit emotional. I just saw that video of the last 20 years, and it's been a long but very fulfilling journey, very challenging. And I think I would say, for your first question, Shivani, well, before that, let me also congratulate Housing and Land Rights Network for this anniversary. In terms of the greatest contribution of the mandate, I would say there are two areas. One is the standard setting. I think the work that we have been able to do in creating operational instruments on how to implement the right to housing. I worked on the evictions guidelines. Raquel worked on the secure tenure principles. Leilani worked on the strategies of housing and other work. I think that's very much is a lasting legacy. I can tell you from my own experience with the evictions guidelines. I've been doing some work over the last few years, reviewing how they have been used, and it's very, very gratifying for me to see that they've become now the current operational standard globally on development-based displacement and are being used in many fora, in many situations, and have influenced policy and lawmaking in a number of countries. I think the second greatest legacy for me, looking back and also, remembering when I meet people, even now traveling around the world, are the missions, the country missions. I think that sometimes they are underrated in the UN system, but I would say the ability that the rapporteurs have to go to the ground and to speak to people, to take testimonies is quite a remarkable access that we have. And I think that leaves behind, even now after many years, I meet people who remember the missions, who say how the missions help to create communication between civil society and governments. I remember one mission in particular in Barcelona in Spain, when Ada Kalu, who's the current mayor of Barcelona, was a struggling anti-poverty and housing rights activist. And the mission, actually, the UN mission gave the credibility to the movement. And now she's the mayor of Barcelona. And this is her own admission, how important the mission, the role that the mission played. So I think that, so those are some of the good contributions. For me, I have many wonderful memories, many disturbing memories of the work that I'd done. And one I would like to particularly point out is in 2002, when I was in Mexico on mission, and I'd gone to the Chiapas, high up in the hills, and it actually happened to be International Women's Day, and I asked to speak separately to the Zapatista women, and they told me they said they didn't care very much about the Zapatista movement. They were more concerned about domestic violence at home. They were more concerned about not having a voice in the decisions that the men were making in that community. And that actually was one of the main factors that convinced me that in my mandate, I had to also concentrate on women's rights to housing, land, property, and inheritance. And, many of you may know that it resulted in a four-year study. So I mean that's I think that for me the mandate actually taught me the commonalities in terms of the structural issues that create the housing crisis that we have across the world, but it also taught me how relevant the right to housing approach is. I think something you mentioned, Shivani, earlier, but also the great difficulty in having different sectors in the world, in countries, accept this approach, and how can we move beyond the legal and policy recognition to actually implement the right to housing. But on the other hand, we have this huge resonance that the housing rights work receives from grassroots people on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing your views, Milun. It's always very interesting to have a personal insight. Raquel, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, yes, this is so nice. And let me here celebrate with all of you the 20 years of Housing, Land and Rights Network, which is indeed an example of how powerful can be a relationship between UN mechanism and grassroots action on the ground. And I think this is one of the key lessons that we had all over the mandates. The more relationship the mandate has with actual organization, local organization and social movements, the more the right to adequate housing can be embedded in the struggles and in the political movements on the ground towards changes at the policy level, also towards change in a conceptual level. So I think that after 20 years of continuously work that have a lot of relationship between one rapporteur with the other, and I can bring some examples of that, it's today my impression is that the idea that housing is a human right is much more included in the language and the culture of local movements, and eventually entering into the public realm, into public policies as well. And second, I would highlight how important was the continuity of the work between the different rapporteurs. So I remember that taking the eviction guidelines that Milun had worked on and translated into very didactic material to be distributed all over the world was very important. But also the work that he has done on mega events and following the work on mega events and the right to housing to actual new countries and bringing them to new countries, Brazil and South Africa, was very important. And I would highlight from my period, I think, thinking back, one of the main contributions of my period, because during my period, we had the financial crisis and the mortgage crisis coming. So I started to work on the financialization of housing. And then a very important shift happened within the Human Rights Council and in the field, because housing and the problem of housing, or the issue of the lack of adequate housing, was seen as a third world, undeveloped world, southern countries, and not as a central element of the center of capitalism, I would say, Europe, North America. And that became that. And that was, I think, very important in order to see the process as a global. And finally, my memories. And I agree completely with Milun, during the missions, to meet with people, to go with them, to go to their houses, to hear them, that was very, very moving and very powerful everywhere. Particularly powerful was to be object of a very harsh attack from governments. And I can mention here from the UK government, when at the end of my period, I was very clear that this new liberal financialized model of housing policy is leading and was leading to a global crisis. And I thank you so much again for Leilani to take up this topic, take up this issue further and further, and giving us a work which is much more profound and deep today. Thank you all.
Shivani, I think I'm up next, yes?
Yes, Leilani.
Yes.
Giving you the cyber time now.
First of all, I just want to thank you in particular, Shivani, for pulling this together, first of all, but also for your tireless, incredible work, your partnership when I was rapporteur, your partnership now with the Shift, and your commitment to these issues, putting out all of the reports and tweets and advocacy that you do. It's so important to the global movement, not just to the movement in India. So a big thanks to you, Shivani. You know, I stand on the shoulders of giants. So I had Maloon and Raquel as these two giants, and I stood on their shoulders and learned so much. I remember when I first met with Raquel, she did an incredible handover with me in Brazil. And she said to me very clearly, the greatest contribution of the Special Rapporteur is to give voice or help give voice to people who do not have voice, to shed light on issues where there is no light being shed, to expose to the international community what's happening on the ground. And I remember the way she said it with such passion. And I had, of course, I knew Maloon's mandate a little bit better than Raquel's. And I knew Maloon had really done that. And I knew Raquel was committed to it. And I felt I had to carry on that legacy. And I do think that is one of the biggest contributions to the that the mandate can give. I have met so many people with struggling and trying to claim the right to housing at local level, and the support from the international system and a rapporteur is so incredibly important. I agreed with what Maloon said about the standard setting as a huge takeaway. I've relied on the standards set by Maloon and by Raquel in all of my work, and their standards are being used, as are mine, by governments, by courts, by lawyers, etc. So that's a huge contribution. In terms of the most powerful memories, besides being detained for 4 hours by the Egyptian police on the side of a road, it is, of course, as both Maloon and Raquel said, it's those meetings with people, the Grenfell Tower survivors, the completely abandoned homeless people in Chile at the Salvation Army in Valparaiso, the pavement dwellers in Delhi who invited me into their tent and served me orange pop that they could hardly afford. We sat on this scratchy blanket and it was 42 degrees, and their warmth and generosity. The single mother with 3 children, 2 teenagers and a 3-year-old in San Diego, African American, living in her car. And the tearful, incredibly emotional meeting with LGBTQ in Egypt, where they were risking their lives to speak with me and my team. And it was just, I mean, those are the moments that I take away with me. And that was the strength I carried with me. Those people's stories needing to be told and their rights needing to be claimed and realized. I'm going to end there.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you for this very moving statements. And I could just add that I think the work that all three of you have done is really shaping housing rights work globally. The standards are so important at every level of work. And it's incredible to see. And I think it's really our job to make sure that they are more disseminated and utilized by local communities, courts, and at every level of access to justice and implementation of human rights. So Raj, we move to you. And I know as you've just taken over, you cannot speak about your impressions and personal experiences of the mandate, but if you would like to maybe reflect on what you think has been the greatest contribution of the Housing Rapporteur mandate, maybe what inspired you to apply for this position, and also perhaps if you could share with us some of your expectations and vision for the mandate as you have a number of years ahead and you're just starting out. So I think we'd love to hear that from you.
Thank you. Let me also say how excited I am to be part of this incredible panel. And first of all, congratulations to HLRN and to you, Shivani. I totally endorse and agree with everything that has been said about a network like HLRN, which is an exemplary stakeholder for the housing mandate. And of course, for me personally, because, well, I've known you guys before I became rapporteur, and HLRN is a key partner of the Displacement Research Action Network as well at MIT. So it's really exciting to see that. And it's incredible that the 20 years of HLRN coincides with the 20 years of the mandate. So great to be here. Yes, of course, I've barely just taken over from May, so I don't have the memories to share about many things, including, of course, country missions, which are currently suspended because of COVID. And in 2020, it looks like I may not have any country mission at this stage. So those are very, moving memories that I heard from all three rapporteurs. So let me say a few words about what I think has been some of the most important contributions of the housing mandate. Well, a couple of them have been mentioned already. One is, I think that I agree with Miloon and others that the development of soft law standards have had an impact on advocacy, especially within movements, and have begun to influence the behavior of states. The guiding principles on development-induced displacement by Miloon, the one on security of tenure by Raquel, and now, of course, the guiding principles on implementation by Leilani, all are serving important roles in this regard. And I think that they're going to be important in my mandate as well. The second is, of course, through country missions, which have been mentioned already, which have at critical moments catalyzed changes in domestic movement building or led to concrete policy or legal changes. So one thinks of Miloon's Canada mission, Raquel's UK mission that she mentioned, and Leilani's incredible success on the Canadian housing rights front. All are amazing stories, and hopefully I can replicate at least some of them. I'll mention a couple of other important contributions. One is that I think that what the UN mandate holders have done is to enable a global movement on housing rights to be built, where the housing rights mandate has been a key pillar. And the secret to the success of this has been the energy and the commitment of the three rapporteurs to kind of contribute to this movement building, which I, of course, should say, it's a daunting challenge for me to try to replicate even half of what they have done. So, but I really admired that, over the years. Finally, I would say a very important sort of contribution of the mandate has been the broad rather than narrow approach to right to housing taken by the mandate. It has helped to push the understanding of what right to housing is or should be. For example, on homelessness, going beyond street homelessness, that more broad approach to right to housing, and the remarkable fact that this broad approach has been a part of a shared vision between the rapporteurs, which is quite remarkable, and one can't say the same thing when it comes to many other mandates. It has in turn set the benchmark against which the positions of not just states but other global actors such as UN agencies can be measured. So I think that I'll just stop here with these reflections, and perhaps the next round of questions I can say a bit more about my vision or thematic priorities. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Raj. I think you summarized really well some of the important contributions, as did the other speakers before you. And I think that the broad approach to the right to housing, I think, is something that has really helped all of us in our work, especially also the very strong linkage between the right to housing with the right to land. And I think that has really given us a lot of impetus in pushing for recognition of the right to land as a human right. So thank you so much. And we move now to the second round of questions. And given that we are faced at this very strange moment in history of this, multiple crises unfolding around us, but also the housing crisis is something that is very acute. And I wanted to hear your expert views on what you perceive to be the greatest challenges today confronting the realization of the human right to adequate housing, and whether you believe the United Nations, including the housing mandate, can help address these. And if yes, then how? So we'll start with Raquel now. Yeah. And so we'll just rotate the order as we go. So Raquel, over to you.
Yes, thank you. First of all, we have to take into account that most of the complaints that we received in an everyday basis as rapporteurs are about evictions. Most of them collective or individual evictions. So what we are talking about when we talk about evictions, and we see now that evictions are also having new faces. Collective evictions of so-called informal self-built communities is the rule, but also now we are talking about evictions because of due to rent arrears. We are talking about evictions after demolition of or privatization of social housing. So we are seeing that more and more land and housing became much more than something essential for the people to live, became a financial asset, a commodity and a financial asset, and the submission of public policies, of state policies, also local policies, urban policies, to the mantra that the best use of a place is the one that can bring more interest to the capital invested in that place. So I think this is the big challenge. The challenge is on the level of economic policy, macroeconomic policy, but also the whole structure of financialized capitalism, which is more and more adding more layers to pre-existing struggles around land. And yes, we have to talk about discrimination. We have to talk discrimination along many, many lines, pre-existing discrimination. We have to talk about also all the pre-existing mechanisms in the different systems that block access to land, as Balakrishnan just mentioned here. So yes, we have to face the issue where the issue is. But at the same time, the question is, how can the UN system help communities and help citizens and help residents to do that? Then comes another problem, which is the UN system in the last years as a whole, the UN system as a whole became not stronger and stronger, became less and less relevant to the global decisions, which are taken completely outside the states or outside a level of international communication of states, which is UN. I'm not saying that in order to say, oh, then let's not work with UN anymore. Let's not work with the system anymore. But we have to be very clear and very conscious of the limits of UN. I remember as a rapporteur that a lot of communities asked me, oh, please, let UN do something about my situation. And I said, UN doesn't have the power to say, stop this eviction. The power to stop this eviction is with you, with everybody who is struggling around that. But having said that, the fact that UN is backing that, the fact that Rapporteur is saying, yes, you are right, the fact that the mandate is pointing out what is the problem, what is the solution, that can bring a big, big strength to the struggles. So that, I think, that still is the most important contribution that mandates around the right to housing can bring. But this is useless if we don't have community, grassroots, and social movements, organizations at local level, at national level, at global level as well.
Thank you, Raquel, for your thoughts. And I'll ask Leilani now to share her views on this question.
Thanks, and thanks, Raquel, for your thoughts, because they're bang on. And of course, I agree with what you said. I mean, I think the big challenge is this paradigmatic shift that's required, but it's required kind of across the board where the right to housing is concerned still, even 20 years later, with all of us at the grassroots level, local, regional, international, chipping away, still we need these major paradigmatic shifts. And I'll take us through some of them. Raquel already talked about some of them, but I mean, just take homelessness. The paradigmatic shift required where people living in homelessness are understood and recognized as rights holders, as opposed to beneficiaries of charity at best, or criminals at worst. That's a huge paradigmatic shift for all levels of government to make. Take government action or inaction. We're still at a place, Raquel herself said, the bulk of the complaints that we receive as rapporteurs tend to be about evictions. That's also partially because we understand rights violations as, when a state acts, when government officials evict, they take measures to remove people from their lands or homes. But what we think less about is when the governments fail to act as a violation, the failure to adopt rights-based housing strategies as a violation of the right to housing. We still need to work on that. The failure of governments to understand that access to justice is very important in order for a human right to actually be a human right. So there's so much, around financialization. Raquel wrote, I see it on over here to my left, a big book. I'm in a film talking about this, the need to undo the uber commodification, financialization of housing. That is the dominant frame in pretty much every country in the world, and we need to undo that. So the challenges, there's no doubt, they're really real and they're huge, and they're why I don't sleep a lot and why I've been so active for the last many years and continue to be so active, because it is massive. In terms of, do I think the UN, the housing mandate can address these? I think I have a similar position to Raquel. International institutions, not just the UN, are really going down. They don't have They don't have the power that a private equity firm has, for example. Think about that. The United Nations as a whole, I really believe, doesn't have the same power that a big private equity firm has. So governments, individual governments don't have the same, could but don't exercise the same authority and power that private equity firms do. So I worry, but that doesn't mean we should abandon. And I think those of us who've already been rapporteurs, and I think, Raj, you'll see as you move forward, the rapporteurs are very special within the UN human rights system. I think, and I didn't, believe it or not, when I came into the position, I actually didn't know how powerful or strong that the mechanism is. I actually think it's one of the best, most flexible, most responsive human rights mechanisms within the system. And of course, there are huge problems. It's under-resourced. Raj, I'm sure you're feeling it. You know, the system is creaky. It doesn't respond well to big systemic issues. And in a certain way, the rapporteurship, it's hard to respond to some big systemic issues. I can talk about that some other time. But the rapporteurship is special. And as Raquel said, it's the grassroots, local, regional movements that are going to make change. Of course, that's where change comes from. It comes from below. It doesn't come from up top. But the rapporteurship can play such a huge role in supporting those movements, helping frame some of those movements, and ensuring those movements understand that this is about human rights law. Governments have legal obligations. And I'm going to push you, Raj, a little bit on the soft law thing. You know, these are real legal commitments that governments have, and local movements can, that's what human rights is about, holding governments accountable and other actors. Yeah, I'll end there.
Okay, thank you so much, Leilani. And I think it's very interesting to hear, you know, the perspectives from both Raquel and you. So now, Raj, I give you some space to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just say that as far as your second question is concerned, the question of whether the UN, including the housing mandate, can help address whatever the greatest challenges are today. I would just say that I wouldn't say much on it now, having just taken over the mandate, but also just to note that the special rapporteur position is a unique one, as Leilani just noted. On the one hand, it is part of the UN in the sense that it is a UN rapporteur position, but the position is really that of an independent expert. And I've never quite understood the rapporteur position to be a UN appointment at all in a conventional sense. It's part of a global movement, really, as I said earlier in my earlier remarks. If you want to talk about special rapporteur and the role that they've played, especially the three rapporteurs who are with me today, I've always seen them as part of a global movement to bring about, you know, a real radical change in the understanding of housing as a human right. Not really see them as part of a UN appointment process in some way. So now in terms of the greatest challenges, let me just start by saying that, of course, as we all know, we are going through a global crisis that we have not seen in over 100 years. The recovery from COVID-19, which is still, you know, playing its way out across the world, comes at a time of extraordinary economic precarity and economic fragility, whose roots go back a long way, at least to 2008, as Raquel has noted. But I also want to say that these issues of precarity and economic fragility comes at a very worrying time of a situation where many states have shown signs of weakening or cracking up in different ways. The social cohesion that, for example, holds communities together within states are showing signs of fracture in a way that is really not conducive to collective public action, for example. As far as the COVID-19 crisis is concerned, as we all know, I did my first report to the General Assembly on COVID-19 and on the right to housing, and I'm presenting it next Wednesday, actually. And I have many short-term as well as medium and long-term recommendations there. So I wouldn't go into that except to say that we are living at a very worrying time. That even the temporary measures that many states had imposed, for example, to deal with the question of the impact of the crisis on right to housing, for example, temporary eviction bans or other kinds of measures that had been imposed, have either expired or they're about to expire. And we are heading into winter with the possibility of the numbers from COVID going up. And it's a very problematic time. And I hope and strongly hope that the approach to dealing with COVID-19 going forward and to rebuilding our way out of COVID-19 rests on a strong commitment to right to housing, among other human rights, as a framework. Now, in terms of, I'll just say a couple of very general remarks about the broad context within which I'm trying to think about my substantive priorities. And of course, I'm still at an early stage, but I'm trying to consult with a number of stakeholders to figure out, what sort of priorities I should focus on. So this meeting is very useful for me as well. The broader contexts are two. First is something that, again, Raquel referred to and Leilani has also referred to, which is a broader neoliberalization of all institutions, not just the state, but that of professions, even the universities, like the one that I am at. And the broader policy context of neoliberalization, I believe, is a barrier to the achievement of the right to housing, because even if we win legal recognition of the right to housing, for example, if the legal recognition of the right to housing is totally compromised by the broader policy context which supports neoliberal economic policies, then it's going to be always an uphill struggle of one step forward, two steps backward. So that is that. So certainly in my mandate, I want to look at some of the structural barriers to see how we can create more policy space for right to housing to flourish. The second is the deepening social divisions and the rise of extremism and the weakening or capture of state institutions, for which there is no easy answer, but clearly it, I think, illustrates more than ever the importance of seeing a mandate like the housing mandate as part of a global movement to counter or to borrow the title of, the documentary that Leilani has made, maybe the pushback. But the pushback needs to be deeper, in terms of movement building to counter the problems that we are currently witnessing. And with worsening economic situation created by COVID, they can possibly get worse. But I also take inspiration from, at the same time, the rise of social movements of extraordinary potential, cutting across racial justice, anti-caste, anti-extremist, on gender issues, on indigenous rights issues, on social economic justice more broadly. They've been going on for at least for 10 years or longer. They give us hope that it is indeed possible still to hope for the realization of the right to housing as a human right. I think that perhaps I'll just mention 2 or 3 broad substantive priorities for the next 2 or 3 reports, and I'll just stop there. They're not the only ones on my list, but clearly I want to focus on these as far as possible going into the next year and beyond. Now, my next report to the Human Rights Council is going to be on an assessment and an evaluation of the 20 years of the mandate. So this meeting is extremely useful. And as I think many of you know, I've issued a call for inputs, including the form of a questionnaire to gather information about this particular aspect. But I will also use that opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about my substantive vision for the mandate and some of the substantive priorities. Now, in terms of the next GA report, the preliminary idea right now is to focus the report on non-discrimination and on spatial segregation as key elements and barriers in the realization of the right to housing. Now, of course, non-discrimination is at the core of the mandate. It's even in the title. But I would like to focus the question of non-discrimination, particularly on spatial segregation, which is related to the kind of urbanization that we are seeing around the world, which is something that all the rapporteurs have spoken about and written about. Perhaps, this is something that requires further development and clarification. The issue of right to housing and its relationship to climate change and disasters and migration, especially within the context of how do we realize a right to an adequate standard of living, when we are presented with a climate crisis, is a key issue. And I anticipate that this will not disappear easily, and certainly connects with the academic work that I've been doing before I took on the mandate. Finally, I would just say that the right to housing and its nexus with humanitarian law and humanitarian response is something that has been close to my heart for quite a long time. And I'd like to explore how this can be further developed, especially within the framework of perhaps a right to remedy and within a broader approach to thinking about reparations, which brings in not only international law, human rights law, but also humanitarian law and law on armed conflict, as well as, of course, emerging parts of international criminal law. I'm just talking about the international legal regimes at this point. But definitely, this is something that requires a great deal of work going forward. As I said, I have many other ideas, but I'll sort of pause there to conclude my remarks now, because I know we have, we are working with tight time limits. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Raj. I think it's very useful for all our attendees to hear about your vision and plans, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners today will be working closely with you in developing and taking the mandate forward. So now, Miluna, I would like to request you to come back to the question of challenges and what you perceive as the role of the UN, what it's been and what it could be. So.
Yes, hello. Well, not much left for me to say with these three great people here. But I just, on this question of the financialization and commodification of the right to housing, I just wanted to say that what has been very disappointing for me when I was a rapporteur and subsequently is almost the complete inability or unwillingness of states to regulate the real estate market or to prosecute the people who are causing, the large-scale corruption are also responsible for evictions. And I think that this, there could be a corrective to this. I mean, you can have a neoliberal system, and while we're trying to fight that large system, you could have a corrective if states very seriously took the responsibility to develop housing policies based on the continuum or the housing first model. But we don't see that. Housing policies are also very much supporting a neoliberal approach. The second obstacle is a much larger one, and I think I wanted to also reinforce Raj's point here that the mandate has to be, in a way, understood as much broader than just the right to housing. It's the lack of local democracy, even in democratic countries. I mean, people do not have a say in what happens in their neighborhood. They don't have a say in what happens in their lands and their villages. Wherever there are local authorities, they do not have the resources to do their work. So this issue of local autonomy, of local self-determination, but generally having a say in what happens relating to housing and land is very important. The third one I want to really focus on is this tension between the urban and the rural. I find that a major weakness across the UN system. And I think that as rapporteurs, I mean, we've tried to work on that, but it needs a lot more work. I personally think there's an obsession with urbanization. I think that to the cost of over 3 billion people in the world who are living in rural areas. And most of the poverty in the world is in the rural areas, particularly in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think this is very critical for us to understand, because I can just speak about India. You know, we have over 170 million rural households, 56% that do not own agricultural land. There's a very strong gender dimension, because 35% of rural households are women-headed, but only 2% own the land. So this issue of land rights it becomes very, very critical. And I don't think we can get to the bottom of the housing rights crisis unless we look at the larger land rights crisis. Also, in terms of the larger assault on land rights that we see around the world. And evictions are not only about homes, it's also about large-scale land grabbing. And as Raquel was mentioning, the new forms of evictions. And as we have seen even during the COVID period, I think HLRN's own reports have shown that over 20,000 people in India itself were evicted between March and July. And we've seen evictions in Brazil, we've seen evictions of the Roma in Italy, you know, all during the time, and actually there should be no evictions. So this is the impunity of states it continues, and that needs to be very much tackled. And I know Raj is actually very consumed with this issue also, so it is going to be figuring in the mandate. In terms of the role of the UN, I would say that there are a lot of problems within the system, and some that I wanted to point out are, one is this incredible bias that continues in the UN on, so civil and political rights are more important than economic, social, and cultural rights. And you know, no matter how hard everybody tries, we have several mandates on ESC rights, but still the attention is very much on CP rights, even within the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN, and also there's not much attention on housing amongst UN agencies. We have UN Habitat, but it would be great to see other UN agencies also giving this right the importance that it deserves. The other problem is the SDGs. I think we have to mention them. They are terribly flawed because they are obsessed with this growth approach. You know, everything has to lead to growth, economic growth. And they don't tackle the structural issues that create homelessness, that create the affordability crisis, that create displacement. And I think finally, I would say that within the UN system, one area which needs significant improvement is follow-up. You know, the work that, let's say, the rapporteurs do is rarely ever followed up. And the follow-up doesn't have to be from the next rapporteur. It has to be from within OHCHR, it has to be from the UN agencies on the ground where we've done our missions. You know, all of that incredible information and repository of data and analysis that goes into a mission is essentially lost. And I think that there's a real need. I mean, this is a part of a larger problem of a lack of follow-up in the UN human rights system. It's also with the treaty bodies and so on. But I think that's something that really needs to be improved. And I think there are, I mean, to end on a positive note, there are, of course, major advances in the UN now. I think the Universal Periodic Review has brought out a lot of issues, even in countries that have not ratified international instruments. We see many, many examples of implementation of recommendations. So I think the housing rights movement needs to be mobilized and get involved with the UPR as well. So there are opportunities, but we really need to get housing. And I think everyone here will probably agree that why is it that food receives so much attention, education, health, but somehow, you know, when lists are made, housing always drops out of the list. And that's something we need to raise the profile of housing and make it something that people are concerned about, as, you know, so that's the big gap between what people recognize as a significant right and an issue of basic dignity on the ground and what the system recognizes. So that's a huge problem in the world. You know, it's the world responds, policies and laws and national institutions, global institutions don't necessarily respond to what are the most urgent issues on the ground. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much, Milun. I think I'm not going to try to summarize or say much because I think everybody's insights have been extremely useful, and also to get a sense of your pulse. You know, I think it's great that to hear from you or what you feel are the greatest challenges. And I think I completely agree about the need to recognize housing as a human right, because it's not just at the UN that it gets marginalized, but also with state governments. And I think all of you who've been on missions to many countries have faced this. And also, I find that, you know, this line between ESC and CP rights also is so blurred when it comes to housing, because it really is a right to life issue. And we have also tried, you know, within the Human Rights Committee to make it a civil and political rights issue, because if you don't have adequate housing, you lose your life. And I think the pandemic has really highlighted that. And if governments do not recognize the right to adequate housing now, then when is the big question. So I think we are a little running behind time, but we're going to move to the next round, which is our last round of questions. It's a shorter round, and we're requesting everybody to be very sharp. So this is a round when we ask the rapporteurs to give their 3 recommendations in terms of moving forward to advance the human right to adequate housing. And I think some of you have already spoken in the last session about some of your key recommendations. So if you could just try to focus on 3. So we're going to start with Leilani.
Thanks, Shivani. I actually thought Milun's comments led so nicely into this section, because he was looking forward and saying sort of, what do we need to do? And I'm just going to pick up on one thing that he said about raising the profile of the right to housing. I have to say, in the 6 years that I was rapporteur, I was trying very much to raise that profile. I was finding exactly what Milun said. Every other social and economic right would be mentioned in something, but not housing. It kept getting left off. And so one of the, I guess, recommendations I have moving forward is that I really think we need to keep popularizing the right to adequate housing and making it very accessible to everyday people, especially young people who are galvanized by this issue in many parts of the world, without dumbing it down, without ridding it of its legal content, but popularizing it. And there's all sorts of ways that we can do that, and I'm trying to do that. I think that's important. One of the preoccupations I have is around authoritarian states and their role in all of this and how we address it. I actually don't have answers. Raquel had that horrible experience with the United Kingdom. I had terrible experiences with both Egypt and France, really pushing back on basics and fundamentals. And so I think whatever our strategies going forward, I mean, look at the new constellation at the council announced yesterday or the day before. I think we have our work cut out for us. I think, I mean, India as well, Brazil. I mean, these are countries that are really pushing back about real basics. And I'll just make a comment about the civil and political rights and social and economic rights and bringing those two worlds together. I believe strongly in doing that, obviously. I will say my right to life report, so I wrote a report on the right to life and the right to housing. I would say that was one of the reports that received the least amount of traction. And that tells us something. So why is that? And now with this pandemic, that report, I mean, not that it was a brilliant report or whatever, but just it's so current. And so I do think we need to explore those avenues more.
Thank you so much, Leilani, and for being really short and concise. Raj?
Yes, thank you. I'll be very short. I don't know that I have any sort of key recommendation. I mean, the challenges that we have towards advancing the right to housing are extremely, well known in this group in particular. And 20 years of the housing mandate has done incredible things in terms of contribution to the recognition of the right to housing. But as all of us have said in different ways, the structural barriers are enormous and they're only getting worse in some ways. I mean, for example, an issue like evictions, which led to the establishment of the housing mandate. I mean, why start with 2000? We can go back to the 1993 resolution of the Commission, which recognized right to the forced evictions as a gross violation of human rights, and led to the appointment of Justice Rajinder Sachar, as part of the subcommission's special rapporteur, then led to Miloon's appointment in 2000. I mean, forced evictions has been with us for decades. But instead of going down, it's like a pandemic. It's happening all the time. And that's the reason why, I was really glad to join the Zero Evictions campaign that Raquel and other movements recently organized. And you were there also as an important part of that, campaign, Shivani. I do think that, I just want to say this. I think that right to housing and steps to advance the right to housing are, of course, terribly important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taken up the job that I have right now. But we shouldn't try to think that all of society's problems are going to be resolved by the recognition of particular rights, and that includes the right to housing, or that human rights, for example, are a solution to all of our problems. Human rights are part of much broader changes that need to happen in states. For example, an issue like local democracy that Miloon mentioned goes well beyond just human rights, whether legally defined or even politically defined. So I just want to say that if we start with perhaps more realistic expectations about what a right to housing mandate might do in terms of what in the coming years, I would say right now, I would say three things. One is let's focus on evictions. Stop forced evictions now. And it was always hard to advocate against evictions, but right now the pandemic gives us a chance to say, don't do it because of health reasons. It's going to actually spread the virus. It's going to make it far worse to actually, tackle the consequences later on. Secondly, we should say, and I hope to say, and I have been saying that we need to actually focus on what comes after COVID-19 and to ensure that something like right to housing is central to the recovery effort. And we should do it in a way which challenges the broader policy environment so that, as I said earlier, right to housing has enough policy space to flourish. So it doesn't become simply a recognition on paper. For example, in India, as we know, there have been some inspiring judgments, that have recognized elements of the right to housing, but they remain exceptions rather than the rule. And the practice of forced evictions continues despite many of these inspiring state level decisions or policies. And thirdly, I would say that one of the main issues that I think all the rapporteurs before me have grappled with in many ways, and I think that, for example, it goes back to Miloon's report on and work that came out of his mission to even Afghanistan, is, what happens when right to housing is violated and violated massively? What about the right to remedy and reparations and broadly the question of accountability? Who is accountable and how are they accountable? And here it's not just the states, but other actors that are, important players increasingly, including, of course, the finance and real estate sectors. So I do think that these are, of course, not the only recommendations that matter, but perhaps these are things on which the mandate could sort of have some impact, hopefully, going forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Raj. And Miloon, your recommendations.
Well, I can't resist getting into the debate here. I actually, this is something we went through when we were drafting the evictions guidelines. I don't think we can take a zero evictions approach, Raquel, Raj, because there are people who need to be moved because of health and life-threatening conditions. There are going to be more people who are going to be already happening, needing to move because of climate change. So I think the position we have to take is that what is in the guidelines is that they should only happen in exceptional circumstances. But there will be times when, but we have to ensure that those people who do have to move, even after satisfying those exceptional circumstances, are rehabilitated, are resettled. It follows an impact assessment system that there is, as Raj is saying, reparation and remedy. So I think we have to be a bit more nuanced in our approach to evictions, but insist on international standards being followed. In terms of moving forward, I can make a lot of recommendations. I think the land rights question is very important. It's very important to combine land and housing, as we are trying to do now in parts of India with something called the Right to Homestead Act. I think we need a much bigger profile from the Secretary General and the High Commissioner of Human Rights on the right to housing. But one recommendation I wanted to make, and this is something that I think all four of us share, is that we are all anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, against the neoliberal approach. It's very radical in a sense, and I think going forward, that kind of radicalism has to continue. I think we have to hold the line on what states can do and private actors can do and cannot do. And I think going forward, and I know Raj is along those lines as well, we have to be able to challenge the system and not compromise, as many parts of the UN are doing. I think the rapporteurs are amongst the only ones, in a way, holding the line. And it's great to see that more and more rapporteurs with this kind of mindset are being appointed, even though we have a Human Rights Council, which is, with very dubious states as members. Somehow the system still works. And I think going forward, I would also very much want to see more and more rapporteurs working together, precisely because of the points we've been making, that housing is, not to be taken separately. So, now we really need more joint work. I think some of that joint work used to happen in the 2000 period. It went down a bit. But I think given the global condition, it really needs to be picked up again. And it's great to see people like Olivier Duchâteau on poverty. It's great to, so there are very strong mandate holders, and I think it would be great to see going forward the rapporteurs taking joint positions, not only on specific human rights violations, but on the global challenges that we face because of the persistence of the capitalist approach. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for sharing your views. I think it's great to see the shared vision and also, ideas to move forward. And I wish some governments were really listening today, or we will make the recording available to them so they can learn about the directions that they need to take to move forward. So we come to the end of our structured panel discussion. And I know we are running a little behind time.
Raquel,
not me.
Shivani, Raquel. She didn't speak yet.
Oh yeah, Raquel, I'm sorry.
Okay, Shivani, I will be very brief. Just 1 minute. First of all, 3 recommendations. And let's get into the controversy here on Zero Evictions campaign, because I think it's very important what was raised here. The Zero Evictions campaign does not mean that to protect life and to protect the possibility of enjoying human rights is just impossible to move. And sometimes, yes, you need to move, you need to resettle. But the Zero Evictions campaign is very essential today because it links together many different situations of violations of human rights related to housing, which are pretty much lived by different people and at different national levels. So it's very important in order to popularize the right to adequate housing. The right to adequate housing is not a very complicated legal concept at the human rights level. It's very concrete, and a campaign can bring that, and a campaign can also bring together with the campaign, a more subtle intervention and recommendation to that. Second recommendation, I think we have to take into account that all the economic, social, and cultural rights were imagined in the Human Rights Council in a time where states had the welfare state as a model. So I think this time is over. So it's not by chance that economic, social, and cultural rights now are not really valued in the UN. So I think we need to make a very, very, now, yes, philosophical, conceptual effort in order to rethink the welfare state. Because I don't think the welfare state can be back as it was. And we need, together with other rights, to think what are the alternatives in order to protect and promote the human right to housing within a very different context. So I think that the challenge that we have for social movements, for anti-capitalist movements, as Milun had pointed, as a whole, is not to go back to what we had, but to go forward towards a new form of society. And yes, I really believe, and I agree with Haj now, that the pandemic gives us a new possibility, a new window, because it's a question to defend life and life in its essentiality. And I think it's very important to take that and to take that forward.
Thank you so much, Raquel, and my profuse apologies about this. So I think now we come to the fun part of today's event. We are running a little behind time, but if it's okay with everybody, I think it would be great if we have 10 minutes for the rapporteurs to speak with one another, and this is unstructured. So I would like someone maybe who has a burning question for another rapporteur, or someone who has been dying to say something but hasn't got an opportunity. So, who would like to go first? But remember, the world is watching. So maybe we can have about 10 minutes. Yes, Raquel.
No, it's just a wonder, and I would like to ask Milun and Leilani, and it's too early to ask Balakrishna, what you regret of not having done, or not having done sufficiently, or having done wrong during our mandate. I think it's important for us also to think on that.
Okay. Who would like to go first?
Leilani, you want to go first? Well, no, I don't have any regrets. I think that, when I started the mandate, I actually opened up the housing issue and was hoping that as I went along, I would be able to focus, but that never really happened. But I think now that I see the work done subsequently, I think perhaps it was the right step to open it up right at the beginning and make it an indivisible right, make it related to, the importance of women and land rights, the importance of land rights itself. The one regret I have is that I didn't get to do the mission to the United States. The invitation had come to me, and the time ran out. I must say I had more time than Raquel and Leilani, because there was a transition from the Commission on Human Rights to the Human Rights Council. But I would have loved to have done that. But on the other hand, I think I really feel that the mission to Canada was also very important, and the fact that all of us have taken this global approach and are also visiting so-called developed countries, I think that has also had a good impact on making the right to adequate housing a global right. So no regrets, Raquel. I would love to do it again.
Leilani?
I don't think I have regrets. I think the first 12 months of the mandate, I was a bit like a deer in headlights, we say in Canada. Living in the north, we have a lot of deer, but a bit like, whoa, what's just happened to me? I didn't have any institutional backing. So, I'm not part of a university, and I just was working at a small NGO in Canada. So it took me a bit of time to really get up full steam. I think I made up for it in my last few years, and every rapporteur has the same experience. Those last couple of years, I remember my partner saying to me, okay, you've got 2 years left, just go. And I really just went. And so I think I made up for it, but I wish I had put in place a stronger, bigger team at the beginning, but I had no resources, of course, so it was impossible. So it took me time to get those resources. So but I feel like, oh, did I waste those first months? You know, I have a little nagging about that. You know, it's impossible to fulfill the role to the extent that is there. And so I always felt, oh, I said no to this and I wish I could have gone. I got asked to go to Belfast about 5 times and I never made it to Belfast. You know, there are these little small things. And then because there are fewer resources in the Global South to bring a rapporteur, I always felt that was unfortunate. So the unofficial visits, which are as important, and I think Maloon and Raquel will attest to this, are as important sometimes as those official visits. In the Global South, to get the resources to bring a rapporteur can be almost impossible. And so I regretted not finding more resources to do those more unofficial visits in the Global South.
Leilani, I don't think you need to worry about lost time. You more than made up for it in your mandate, so relax. Raquel, do you want to answer that question?
Yes. It's just because I struggled so much during my mandate to do a mission in India.
Yes,
I wanted so much to work, and it was impossible. But fortunately, Leilani could do afterwards. But also, for me, it was very difficult not having really set a lot of missions in Africa. The 2 missions that I was able to do in Africa, both Algeria and Rwanda, were very controlled missions in terms of not really being able to do the type of work that we like to do, to be freely or with free communities able to speak. So it was very difficult, and I miss a lot the contact with a more African perspective on housing that for me was a pity. But at the other hand, what I learned, for instance, with the mission in the US, which was the national organization of local different groups in the US made the mission much more powerful. The fact that you had a national organization of the civil society. What happened also in Brazil and other countries, not with me, but with Miloon and other rapporteurs, that brings another thing. So that comes to the problem that, of course, we don't have enough resources to do that in advance, to organize that, to be able to do more, to travel more. And this is definitely a constraint. It's one rapporteur for the world with normally one full-time assistant, which is a functionary of the Human Rights Council, and not many at all. So, I mean, what can we do with that?
Thank you. I think that was really interesting. And Raquel, I think you had probably the only rapporteur who did a mission to an institution, like your mission with the World Bank. I think it's quite historic because I think it hasn't been repeated, and it's quite a legacy that you left there. But as someone who has worked very closely and seen upfront what rapporteurs have to are faced with, I don't think anyone should regret anything or be hard on themselves, because as you said, it's the whole world. And I always shudder to think of what your inbox looks like when you wake up every morning, because around the world, people are sending complaints about housing rights violations, and there's only so much you can do. And I think when we look at the legacy that you have left behind, it is so impressive with all the financial constraints, the human resource constraints, family issues to deal with. I think it's just remarkable. So I really would say, like, kudos and congratulations to all of you. And maybe that's something that we need to recommend going forward, Raj, is, more resources. And I know the world is like in a financial crunch right now, but how do we make sure that this special procedure mechanism, of special rapporteurs, which is so vital to upholding the independence, the transparency, and promoting human rights within the human rights system of the United Nations, how do we make sure that it's strengthened? So I think we may have 5 minutes.
So can I ask? Yeah, I'd like to ask in the context of how do we strengthen the system. In fact, I want to sort of pose this. I think it's a very unique opportunity to ask all three rapporteurs here their reflections on how they saw their own role change in the context of the changing politics at the UN Human Rights Commission. Then, after the commission was replaced by the council, in the sense that, as we all know, there has been an attempt which succeeded in trying to curb or regulate the activities of the special rapporteurs, particularly through the mechanism of the code of conduct. Now, I believe, Milun, the code of conduct came in 2007. So most of your term, you did not have any code regulating you. So you got away with it. But I'm just wondering how, whether that made any difference at all in your work, as opposed to Raquel, when you came in, there was a code of conduct with expectations about, rapporteurs having to do their work in particular ways or watch their back or whatever. And the same with you, Leilani. So I was just wondering the politics of how this is going to work, because the question of how to strengthen, for example, special procedures is very much tied to the question of the delicate, necessary, but embarrassing nature of special procedures and of mandate holders, such as the special rapporteurs within the UN system. They're in the system, but yet not off the system, which is what kind of gives them both the institutional purchase as well as, of course, the credibility that is needed. Because if they're totally in the system, they would be compromised in a way that they're not. And the three rapporteurs here are good examples of that. But I was wondering, certainly, when I came in, for example, the orientation, the introduction to the mandate, and even everyday working, I could say that the question of politics and code of conduct comes up quite frequently. And I was just wondering if you could reflect a bit on that.
Okay, so I would request everyone to be brief. Milun, would you like to start?
Yeah, Raj, it's a good question. I think that, part of my beginning 5-6 years of the mandate were with the Commission on Human Rights and then the Human Rights Council. And I was actually very actively involved with the coordinating committee of the rapporteurs in challenging the code of conduct. And in fact, we were able to dilute some of the provisions. In my experience, I think by and large, most rapporteurs pretty much ignored what was in the code of conduct. You obviously had to, I think, modulate your behavior a bit in terms of what you were doing on missions with the media and so on. But I don't think, I firmly believe that once you're appointed, you're appointed. I don't think there's ever been a single case where a rapporteur was told to leave her or his mandate. And I think you have to just be a little careful. But as I was saying before, the radical work has to continue. And I don't think the code of conduct should get in the way of what you do, because our mandates are governed by, the Charter and the UDHR and the international instruments. And I think as long as we follow those, that very broad perspective of human rights, we should be okay. And I don't see, this is the big contradiction in the system, that you have more and more conservative states that are now in the council, but they keep appointing very independent rapporteurs. And I think, what I was saying before about rapporteurs continuing the work, continuing to do more work together, I would love to see more joint missions, for example. I was able to do one with 3 other rapporteurs in Lebanon. It was an incredible experience. So I think you just have to fight, keep fighting the system. And if you do it collectively, it will work.
Okay, thank you. I think Raquel, you want to go next?
No, yes, just to add to Milun, which I completely agree, there is a permanent tension between the High Commissioner of Human Rights staff, which tries all the time to keep you on track, but also tries to support you. On track means don't go further, don't, and plays much more the diplomatic game in the council, but at the same time tries to support you and your freedom of speech and thought and possibility of really saying what needs to be said. So I think the tension is there. It's an everyday tension, and the code of conduct is just floating there, but I don't believe, like Milun, that it was never been used so far. But it's a tension, and you have to choose every day on what, okay, you concede and what you don't concede. And you have to do concession every day. And you have to struggle against every day, almost in every phrase of your work. And this is part of the possibilities and limits of the SEM. That's what I think.
Thanks, Raquel. Lilani?
Yeah, I think my experience was slightly different. I don't disagree that it's an everyday tension. I think that's true. But over time, I'm interested to know if Milun and Raquel, we don't have time to talk about it. We'll talk some other time, but whether it became just like this little sweater I had on my shoulders, and sometimes I'm taking it off and putting it on and taking it off. I became so used to having to navigate that line that Raquel talked about. It didn't end up feeling like it really encumbered my work. And maybe that goes to what Milun said. I always felt like I was an independent expert and I was just doing my job as an independent expert. And there were times when the code of conduct helped me because I was, let's say, on mission and I was getting pushback from a state, and I was actually completely within the code of conduct, and I was able to bring it out and say, excuse me, I'm just doing what it says here. So in that way it was useful. There were times that for all of this, like force kind of trying to regulate our behavior, when I really needed the system to be behind me, it wasn't actually always there when it should have been. And I'm speaking specifically about pushback from Egypt, which was tremendous on me. And I was very alone in that for quite a while, it felt. And so for all of these, trying to modulate maybe that was part of it. The system didn't want to chastise Egypt for its treatment of me, which was gendered and anti-human rights and all sorts of things. And the same with France. I didn't really feel the system was behind me, and France refused to respond to my report on the floor of the council. I mean, it was unacceptable for a nation like France to do that. And so it is a prickly relationship, Raj. But I think maybe as time goes on, it just becomes like you'll just be able to navigate it with grace.
Okay, thank you. Milun has hand up. You want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I was a civil society activist before I became rapporteur, and actually the positions I took were not at all different from what I was saying as a civil society activist. But what I did learn during the mandate is that, you have to modulate your language a bit. You have to be a little more constructive. So you're not only condemning or pointing out the violations, but you're also saying, look, there is a way to go forward. And I think in this sort of, you don't have to be hostile all the time. And I think there's a lesson here for civil society around the world that is always just complaining, or only going after violations. I think we all have to try to work even with hard partners, even with difficult governments. We have to be constructive. And I think that's a major lesson that I learned, and I continue to do that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have crossed over by 15 minutes time, and I think participants have been very patient. And unfortunately, we do not have time or space for audience interaction, but I'm sure you'll agree that this has been a really fascinating and interesting discussion. Does anyone have a burning last comment to make from the panel? Do you think we can close? Okay, so wow, that was really an incredibly amazing discussion. And I'm sure, like me, everyone is convinced that the UN Selection Committee did an incredible job of selecting the best people out there for the job of Special Rapporteur on adequate housing. I mean, I personally don't think there could have been anyone better. And in terms of the legacy that you have all left behind, in terms of your continued commitment, it's just incredible. And Raj, we are really happy that you've been selected, because what Milun said, what's made the housing rapporteur mandate so special is the shared vision that you've all had. And one regressive person would have just shattered all the achievements of the past. And, you know, I think there have been moments at the time of selection when we've been really nervous as like, this person should not get selected because that would just damage all the work done. So I think we've been really blessed. I think the global human rights community, the United Nations, all local communities, everybody struggling on the ground for the right to housing is blessed to have had all of you. And in my personal work, in HLRN's work, I cannot stress enough how much we use your reports, your standards, your recommendations. Leilani, your India mission, which I know was super tough, but it was so great that it happened. And I just want to end by saying that I really appreciate your work, and I really want to emphasize the importance of the right to housing. And after 20 years, I really hope and pray that this human right gets the recognition and the implementation it needs. Because how many more lives do we need lost to homelessness? How many more people are going to die from evictions? How many more homes are going to be crushed under bulldozers? And how many people are going to lose health and jobs and education because they don't have adequate housing? And I really believe there can be no economic and social justice without housing justice. There can be no racial justice without housing justice. And there can be no gender justice without housing justice. The right to housing is so critical to the implementation of all human rights. And we cannot have cures to pandemics, to disasters, to climate change if we do not have adequate housing for all. And I really hope that the United Nations, that governments, that local governments, national governments, regional mechanisms really wake up, because as I said, if not now, then when? And your work is really an amazing testament to the importance of the right to housing and what needs to be done. I think any report of yours, if we open it today, those recommendations are still so valid. And Raj, congratulations to your new report on COVID-19. I think it's so important that the right to housing has to be at the center of any post-recovery approach. We're already seeing evictions, we're already seeing land grabbing in the name of economic recovery. And I think that if we do that, then we're really going backwards. So as the United Nations celebrates its 75 years, I really hope that we have more to look forward to in strengthening the mechanism, but especially the special procedure mechanism and this mechanism. So I think I want to thank the past rapporteurs for their amazing work and their continued commitment. I know you at any time to help us defend the right to housing globally, nationally, and locally. And Raj, we're really pleased and we wish you all strength and courage as you take on this mandate at one of the most difficult times that our present history has known. So I would love if we had the audience that could applaud, because you all deserve a standing ovation and an amazing applause. And my deepest gratitude to you on behalf of the Housing and Land Rights Network. I extend a really warm thanks, and also to the patience of the panelists and also the attendees. And I apologize that we could not hear you this time, but I'm sure you'll agree that listening to the rapporteurs was really worth every moment that you were on this panel. So once again, a goodbye from New Delhi, and have a good day, or a good night, or a good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. So nice to see you all.
Bye.
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 Ciao.
It's really a pleasure to see you all.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
wonderful to see you.
Absolutely.
We'll
Great event. Thank you.
We'll do this again.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks,
Stay
Shivani.
safe, everyone.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Shivani. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Leilani. Bye,
Bye.
Laura.